Hello, late-night listeners. Before telling story, please comment in which time you're watching this video and which country you're from. The Haunting of House 13. I've always been drawn to the macabre, the eerie, the unsettling, the unknown. It was this morbid fascination that led me to purchase House 13, a dilapidated Victorian mansion nestled deep in the heart of a forgotten neighborhood. The locals warned of strange occurrences, whispers of a dark past, but I dismissed their tales as old wives' tales. The house was a labyrinth of creaking floorboards and echoing hallways. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that seeped through the stained glass windows, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and writhe. At night, the house groaned and moaned, as if trapped in a silent scream. One evening, as I sat alone in the dimly lit library, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the open window. A faint whisper seemed to brush against my ear, a name spoken so softly I could barely hear it. Sarah. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah was the name of the previous owner, a young woman who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut for no reason, and I would hear faint whispers echoing through the house. The most unsettling thing was the feeling of being watched, of a presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the attic. Mustering up all my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the creaking staircase. The attic was pitch black, save for a sliver of moonlight that illuminated a dusty trunk. As I approached the trunk, I heard a faint sob. Heart pounding, I flung open the lid of the trunk. Inside, I found a small, skeletal figure. It was Sarah, preserved in time, her eyes wide with terror. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. Sarah had been trapped in the attic, forgotten and alone. I knew then that I had to help her. With trembling hands, I removed Sarah's remains from the trunk and laid them to rest in the garden. As I watched the coffin being lowered into the ground, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The haunting of House 13 was finally over, or so I thought. Story number 2, the creaking attic. I was always a bit of a loner, content to spend my days lost in books or building intricate Lego structures. So when my parents announced they were going away for the weekend, I was excited to have the house all to myself. The first night was uneventful. I watched my favorite movies, ate junk food, and stayed up way past my bedtime. But the next day, things started to feel a little off. I heard strange noises coming from the attic, like scratching and whispering. I tried to ignore it, but it kept getting louder. Finally, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly climbed the creaky staircase. The attic was dark and dusty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. I shone the flashlight around, trying to find the source of the noise. Then I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the corner of the room. It was a large, shadowy figure, and it was moving towards me. Panic surged through me as I turned and ran back down the stairs. I slammed the attic door shut and locked it. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the creature found another way in. I tried to call my parents, but their phones were turned off. I was alone, scared, and trapped in my own home. As the hours passed, I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I was convinced the creature was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to stay awake, but I was exhausted. Eventually, I fell asleep, terrified that I wouldn't wake up. When I finally did open my eyes, the sun was shining through the window. The house was quiet, and there was no sign of the creature. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I knew I would never forget the night I was home alone and faced my biggest fear. Story number 3, the Whispering Walls. I'd always been fascinated by the old, abandoned mansion at the end of our street. The locals whispered tales of ghostly sightings and unexplained noises. I dismissed them as childhood fantasies, but a sense of curiosity always tugged at me. One stormy night, I decided to explore the mansion. Bracing myself against the howling wind, I crept through the overgrown garden and pushed open the creaking front door. The interior was a labyrinth of dusty rooms and cobweb-draped hallways. A chill ran down my spine as I ventured deeper into the house. The most unsettling room was the attic. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floorboards groaned beneath my feet. As I wandered through the dim light, I heard a faint whisper coming from one of the walls. I pressed my ear against the plaster, and the whisper grew louder. It was a woman's voice, speaking in a language I didn't understand. I tried to ignore it, but the whisper followed me. It seemed to be coming from everywhere, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized I was trapped in the mansion with a disembodied voice. Desperate to escape, I stumbled down the stairs and burst out of the front door. As I ran through the rain, I looked back at the mansion. The windows seemed to glow with an eerie light, and I could swear I heard the whisper following me. If you like this kind of videos, then make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for future videos. Story number 4, The Vanishing Painting. I inherited a beautiful old painting from my grandmother. It was a portrait of a woman with haunting eyes that seemed to follow me around the room. I hung the painting in my bedroom, and at first I found it comforting. But then, strange things started to happen. One night, I woke up to find the painting gone. I searched the room frantically, but there was no sign of it. The next morning, it was back on the wall, as if nothing had happened. This continued for several nights, the painting disappearing and reappearing without a trace. I began to feel uneasy. I had a sense that something sinister was at play. One night, I decided to stay up and watch the painting. As the hours passed, the room grew colder and darker. Suddenly, I saw a faint glow emanating from the canvas. The woman's eyes seemed to widen, and a chilling whisper filled the room. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The painting was gone again, but this time I felt a presence in the room. A cold, icy sensation crept up my spine as I realized I was not alone. Story number 5. The Haunted House on Willow Street. My parents always warned me about the old, abandoned house on Willow Street. They said it was haunted, that strange noises could be heard coming from its windows at night. As a child, I was terrified, but as I grew older, my curiosity overcame my fear. One dark and stormy night, I decided to explore the house. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain lashed against the windows. The house was shrouded in darkness, its silhouette looming ominously against the stormy sky. I hesitated at the front door, but my curiosity was too strong. I pushed it open, and a wave of cold air swept through the house. The interior was a labyrinth of dark, dusty rooms. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floorboards creaked beneath my feet. As I wandered through the house, I heard strange noises coming from the attic. A chill ran down my spine as I climbed the creaking staircase. The attic was pitch black, save for a sliver of moonlight that illuminated a dusty trunk. I approached the trunk cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached out to touch it, I heard a faint whisper. "Help me," it said. I froze, my blood running cold. I knew I had to open the trunk. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, I found a small skeletal figure. It was the ghost of a young girl, trapped in the attic for decades. I felt a surge of pity for the poor girl. I knew I had to help her. With trembling hands, I removed her remains from the trunk and laid them to rest in the garden. As I watched the coffin being lowered into the ground, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The haunting of the house on Willow Street was finally over. Or so I thought. Story number 6. Now why I agreed to house sit. I could have been at a party tonight, surrounded by friends, but instead I'm here, alone in this massive, creaking house. It belongs to the Thompsons, family friends who are out of town for the weekend. When they asked if I could feed their cat and water the plants, I thought it'd be easy money. Besides, I always liked their place, until now. The storm outside is getting worse. Rain lashes against the windows, and every so often, thunder shakes the walls. But it's not the weather making my skin crawl. It's the house itself. It feels different, darker. The silence between the thunderclaps is thick and oppressive. The house groans as if something is moving through the walls. I try to shake off the unease, convincing myself it's just the wind or old pipes. But there's something about tonight, something heavy in the air, like the house is alive and watching. I turn on every light I can find, but it doesn't help. The shadows seem to press in, like they're waiting just outside the glow. The cat, Misty, has been hiding all night, which is odd. She's usually friendly, rubbing against my legs as soon as I step in the door. I call for her, but there's no response. Just more of that eerie silence, broken only by the rumble of thunder. Suddenly, a soft thud echoes from upstairs. I freeze, heart pounding. It was too solid to be the wind. My brain scrambles for logical explanations. Maybe a book fell over, or a window blew open. But deep down, I know better. I shouldn't be hearing anything from upstairs. The Thompsons' bedroom door was locked when they left, and I haven't been up there. Against my better judgment, I grab my phone and head for the stairs. My flashlight cuts through the dimness, but it barely makes a dent in the thick shadows lingering at the edges. Each step creaks under my weight, the sound amplified in the stillness. As I reach the landing, the air feels colder. My breath comes in shallow gasps. I stop in front of the bedroom door. It's slightly ajar now, though I swear it was closed earlier. The hair on the back of my neck stands on end. Slowly, I push the door open, the hinges groaning loudly as if the house is warning me not to go in. The room is empty. Just the bed, neatly made, and the dresser across from it. I let out a shaky breath, relieved for a moment. But then I notice something out of place. There's a framed photo on the dresser, one I've seen 100 times. It's of the Thompsons at the beach, smiling and carefree. Only now, something's wrong. In the photo, there's a shadow behind them, a figure that wasn't there before. It's tall, unnaturally thin, and its head is tilted, as if it's staring directly at me. My heart slams in my chest. I take a step back, my legs shaking, but something catches my eye in the reflection of the dresser mirror. I whip around. Standing in the corner, just out of reach of the dim light, is the figure. It's the same as in the photo, tall, skeletal, its head, story number 7, the Hollow House. It began with the key, a small rusted piece of metal wrapped in an old brittle letter. I found it while cleaning out my grandfather's attic after he passed, tucked away in a dusty wooden box. The letter had only 2 words scrawled on it, in my grandfather's unmistakable shaky handwriting. The Hollow. I hadn't heard of the Hollow before. No one in the family had ever mentioned it, and there was nothing in my grandfather's documents or journals to explain it. The only clue was the key, but it was enough to pique my curiosity. A quick search online revealed that the Hollow was an old nickname for an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, a place long whispered about but rarely spoken of aloud. Locals said the house was cursed, that it drove people mad. Or worse, that it took them. Intrigued and half-believing it was all just local legend, I decided to visit. I packed a flashlight, a small crowbar, and the key, and set off in my car late in the afternoon. The house wasn't far, about a 30-minute drive from the edge of town, down a gravel road swallowed by thick trees. As I drove deeper into the woods, the daylight faded faster than it should have, the sun seemingly swallowed by the dense canopy above. By the time I reached the house, the sky was a dull gray, with the first hints of evening creeping in. The Hollow stood at the end of the road, half hidden by overgrown vines and tall grass. It was larger than I expected, with a crumbling stone foundation and windows dark and empty. The whole place exuded a sense of abandonment, as though it had been forgotten by time. The house was sinking into itself, as though the earth was slowly reclaiming it. I parked the car and stepped out, the air suddenly cooler than it had been moments before. As I approached, the key in my hand felt unnaturally warm, like it had been sitting in direct sunlight. The front door of the house was massive, made of old oak and warped by the years, yet it still seemed strangely intact. Taking a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. The door creaked open with a sound that echoed into the silent woods. The smell of mildew and rot hit me immediately, the staleness of air that hadn't moved in decades. I hesitated at the threshold, feeling the weight of something unseen pressing against my chest, a warning maybe, but I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I moved through the entryway. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing patches of mold beneath. Broken furniture littered the hallway, shattered picture frames, an overturned chair, the remnants of a long-forgotten life. It felt wrong being here, like I was trespassing on something older, something waiting. There were no obvious rooms on the first floor that stood out, just the skeletal remains of a once grand home. But at the far end of the hall was a staircase leading down. The basement. Something about it pulled me. I could almost hear a faint humming sound, like a low murmur vibrating through the walls, though I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or something real. I moved cautiously toward the stairs. The door was half open, revealing the top steps. I hesitated, then descended. The air grew colder with every step, the darkness thickening. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the pitch black. At the bottom, the basement spread out in a wide open space. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, just more decay, broken shelves, and debris. But then I noticed something unusual. At the far end of the basement was another door, one that shouldn't have been there. It didn't match the rest of the house. This door was sleek, metallic, and pristine, with no signs of age. My heart began to race. I knew the stories about the Hollow, about how it wasn't just an abandoned house, but something much more sinister. But I hadn't expected this. I moved toward the door, my footsteps soft on the dirt floor. There was no handle, no keyhole, just a smooth surface. As I stood in front of it, the door began to shift. Slowly it slid open on its own, revealing a narrow stone hallway beyond. Cold, stale air rushed out, and with it came a whisper, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a sound like breath being drawn in, like the house itself was alive, pulling me deeper. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I stepped through the door. The hallway stretched impossibly far, longer than the house should have been able to contain. The walls were lined with carvings, ancient, twisted figures etched into the stone, their faces contorted in agony or madness. The air here felt heavier, thicker, pressing against me as I moved, and with each step the whispering grew louder. I kept walking, the flashlight flickering as the stone tunnel seemed to wind deeper into the earth. And then ahead I saw it, a massive chamber. The ceiling arched high above, disappearing into shadow. In the center of the room was a circle of stones, and in the center of the circle something pulsed. It was black, slick, and undulating, like a mass of living darkness. It moved with a rhythm, as if it were breathing. As I approached, the whispering stopped, replaced by a low, guttural hum. The thing in the center writhed, and I felt it, its pull, deep in my bones. I froze. My flashlight flickered once more, and in that brief moment I saw them, figures standing at the edge of the stone circle, human-shaped but wrong. Their faces were stretched and pale, their eyes hollow pits. They stood still, watching. And then, in unison, they turned toward me. Their mouths opened wide, far wider than any human mouth should have been able to, and they screamed. The sound hit me like a physical force, knocking me backward. The flashlight fell from my hand, its light rolling across the chamber. The figures moved, gliding toward me, their feet never touching the ground. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran back down the impossibly long hallway, past the twisted carvings, through the metal door and up the basement stairs. The house groaned, the walls vibrating with the force of the things chasing me. I could hear them behind me, their guttural screeches echoing in the small space. I reached the front door and threw it open, stumbling out into the night. The rain had started, heavy and cold, but I didn't stop. I sprinted to the car, jumped inside, and hit the gas, the tires spinning in the mud before catching and tearing down the gravel road. I didn't look back. When I reached town, I pulled over, my heart hammering in my chest. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those hollow figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching. But there was nothing, just the trees, silent and still. I don't know what I found in that house. I don't know what the Hollow really is. But I know this, whatever I disturbed down there, it's awake now. And it's not going back to sleep. Story number 8. I have working parents, and being from a nuclear family, I have been alone at home more often than not. I was 12 at that time. I had just come home from school. It was late afternoon, and I knew my mom wouldn't be home for another 3 to 4 hours, thus having the house all to myself. Naturally, I was just relaxing on the living room couch, munching some snacks while still in my school uniform, without a care in the world, and the fan on full speed to cool the room temperature as soon as possible. I would like to mention here that we have modest-sized apartment. The living room is rectangular and about 70 square feet, 15 feet x 5 feet, with the fan in the middle and with the couch and the rest of the cupboards sticking to the walls on 2 sides of the room. As a result, the fan isn't directly above the couch, but not too far away either. If I would have taken 1 step diagonally, I would have been directly underneath the fan. For those of you who haven't guessed the end by now, The fan fell down while still working. All of it happened in such a split second. One moment, it was up and whirring, and the next it was on the floor, still rotating and moving in a circle on the floor. My first reaction was comparing it to a giant spinning top and admiring the beauty of its motion. Not panicky or hysterical like someone who just had a near-death experience, but a bit of both, amused and shocked, and a whole lot fascinated, from the spinning top analogy, of course. Afterwards, it continued spinning for some time whilst I waited for it to stop, and then proceeded to phone my mom, who was hysterical. No credits for guessing here. Moms just worry way too much. I would like to mention here that when a fan falls down, it doesn't fall down straight, rather it's a curved path, thanks to tangential velocity it has while rotating. I guessed so, feel free to correct me if I am wrong. Had the curved path of its falling trajectory involved the area above the couch, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. But, thankfully, if you like this kind of videos, then make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for future videos.